There's a lot of secrets, and for us, our secret involves a tragedy that's really kind of
Dark.
It's really kind of deep and dark. It's not funny.
For 30 years, Friends gave us coffee cups, cozy couches, and the illusion that everything behind the cameras was just as warm as what played out on your screen. But Lisa Kudrow, the quiet one, the polite one, the one who always seemed perfectly fine, just blew that illusion apart. In one interview, she said things about Friends that nobody was prepared to hear. Toxic behavior, adult themes, brutal cruelty, and the cast knew every single bit of it. The interview that dropped like a grenade. It started with a sit-down with the Times of London, published on April 23, 2026. On the surface, it looked like one of those warm, reflective pieces. A beloved actress looking back on the show that made her a household name. But somewhere between the pleasantries and the nostalgia, Lisa Kudrow pulled the pin. She said that there was definitely mean stuff going on behind the scenes, and just like that, the carefully protected legend of Friends cracked wide open. Now, let's be clear, Kudrow wasn't out here throwing grenades for the fun of it. She's 62 years old, still earning residuals that would make your jaw hit the floor, and by her own admission, she will never say anything bad about the show itself. She's said it's still incredible work, and that she'll cherish every second of it. But there's a difference between loving the show and lying about what it cost. Because what she described wasn't just drama, it wasn't petty gossip or a bit of behind-the-scenes tension that every production deals with. What she laid out was a specific, disturbing pattern of behavior. Behavior that, if it happened in any other workplace today, would have HR departments scrambling and lawsuits flying before the ink dried on the first complaint form. She said the writer's room was brutal. She said there was mean stuff. And then she went further, a lot further, describing a behind-the-scenes culture that was, at best, deeply uncomfortable, and at worst, something that should have been stopped long before anyone ever said, "How you doing?" And yet, here's the twist. For all the explosive things she said, Kudrow wasn't angry when she said them. She was matter-of-fact, almost calm, like someone who made peace with it long ago and is only now deciding the rest of the world deserves to know. Which honestly makes it worse, because it means this was never a secret to the people who were there. It was just a secret from us. So what exactly did Lisa say? And why is the internet absolutely losing its mind over it? Inside the writer's room. Here's where things get uncomfortable, and they should. Friends, the show, the brand, the cultural phenomenon, was built on warmth and wit. 10 seasons, 236 episodes, 6 friends navigating love, life, and New York City with a warmth that somehow never got old. But the scripts those 6 actors were handed every week? They came out of a writer's room that Kudrow is now describing as something closer to a locker room with a deadline. She told the Times that the writing staff was made up of roughly 12 to 15 people, and that it was, in her own words, mostly men. According to Kudrow, if an actor flubbed a line in front of the live studio audience of 400 people, the writers didn't pull them aside for a quiet word. They didn't send a note. They went backstage and, according to Kudrow herself, made harsh remarks, reportedly using expletives as they criticized her, claiming she couldn't read her lines, accusing her of not putting in the effort, and blaming her for disrupting their delivery. This wasn't some anonymous extra or a nervous guest star. This was the cast of what would become the most watched sitcom of the decade. Women who would go on to earn $1 million an episode called that behind their backs for stumbling over a punchline in front of a live crowd. And it didn't stop at insults. Kudrow also revealed that the men in the writers' room were spending their late nights discussing their adult themes involving Jennifer Aniston and Courtney Cox. She said that they knew that back in the room, the guys would be up late discussing their adult themes about Jennifer and Courtney, and that it was intense. Intense. That's the word she chose. Not shocking, not unacceptable. Intense. Like it was the weather, just something you deal with and move on from. And in a way, that's exactly what she did. Kudrow said her coping strategy was to simply not care what was said when she wasn't in the room. That they could say what they liked about her behind her back, because then it didn't matter. She said she gave the writers a pass on their 3 a.m. depravity because at least they were working, and at least they were trying to make the show great. You can almost admire the pragmatism. But it also raises a harder question. If the women in that cast had to mute their discomfort just to survive the production of one of history's greatest sitcoms, what does that say about the culture that produced it? And here's the part that will really get under your skin. This wasn't actually the first time this exact behavior had been reported. So why didn't anyone do anything about it the first time? The lawsuit nobody wanted to talk about. Here's a name you might not know. Amayani Lyle. In 1999, Lyle was a writer's assistant on Friends. Her role sounded simple on paper, but in reality, it placed her right at the center of one of television's biggest machines. Her job was essentially to sit in the writer's room and transcribe everything. Every brainstorming session, every creative conversation, every joke pitch, every riff, and every comment that flew across the room. Nothing was off the record. And according to her, what she heard there left her deeply disturbed. According to court documents, Lyle alleged that she witnessed male writers on Friends making sexual comments about Jennifer Aniston and Courtney Cox, simulating adult themes, and engaging in behavior she described as vulgar, relentless, and degrading. She also claimed she was subjected to racial harassment. In her view, this wasn't just edgy comedy banter or an eccentric Hollywood workplace. It was a hostile work environment, hiding behind the excuse of creative freedom. So she sued Warner Brothers Television for sexual and racial harassment. The case didn't quietly disappear. It dragged through the California courts for years, eventually reaching the California Supreme Court. In 2004, the court ultimately ruled against her. Their reasoning? Because the writers were crafting storylines and jokes for a sitcom centered heavily around adult themes, dating, and relationships, graphic conversations in the room could be considered part of the creative process, even if offensive or uncomfortable. In other words, the very thing she found disturbing was framed as potentially necessary for the job. Let that sink in. Discussing adult themes about your lead actresses out loud in front of support staff was ruled by a court to be potentially defensible as part of comedy writing. A decision that still sounds surreal more than 20 years later. And now, decades after the lawsuit faded from headlines, one of those lead actresses is effectively confirming that what Lyle described wasn't some exaggerated tale from a disgruntled employee. It was real. It was the room. It was the culture. It was Tuesday. Nobody from the original writing staff has publicly responded to Lisa Kudrow's claims. NBC, Warner Brothers, and representatives for Jennifer Aniston and Courtney Cox have all reportedly been contacted by outlets including E! News, Fox News, and Page 6. So far, the silence has been deafening. But before you decide how to feel about all of this, it helps to understand who Lisa Kudrow really is, because she isn't just Phoebe Buffay, not even close. Before Phoebe, the woman behind the quirky blonde, Lisa Valerie Kudrow was born on July 30, 1963, in Encino, California. The youngest of 3 children in a middle-class Jewish family. Her father, Dr. Lisa Kudrow, was a physician who specialized in treating headaches. Her mother, Nedra, worked as a travel agent. It was a grounded, academic household, not exactly the natural incubator for one of television's most beloved comedic characters. And indeed, for most of her young life, acting wasn't even on the table. Lisa was a serious student. She played varsity tennis in high school and college. She graduated from Vassar College with a Bachelor of Science degree in psychobiology. Then she went home to Los Angeles and started working with her father, conducting actual clinical research on the relationship between left-handedness and cluster headaches. She and her dad even co-authored a published scientific study. This is Phoebe Buffay, a published neurological researcher. The pivot to comedy came from an unexpected place. Her brother's childhood friend, a comedian named John Lovitz. He saw something in Lisa, a natural funny streak she'd apparently been honing on her family her whole life, and encouraged her to try improv. She started attending classes at the Groundlings, the legendary Los Angeles comedy school, while still working in her father's clinic. At the Groundlings, she crossed paths with a struggling comedy writer named Conan O'Brien. The two briefly dated before realizing they were better as friends. Ironic, right? O'Brien pushed her to stick with acting when she nearly quit. She, in turn, urged him to try his luck in late-night television. Not a bad trade. But the road to Friends was far from smooth. She auditioned for Saturday Night Live in 1990 and lost the spot to Julia Sweeney. She landed a role on Frasier, then got cut during pilot tapings, replaced by Perry Gilpin as Roz Doyle. She watched that door close in her face and wondered, by her own admission, if she would ever crack it. What saved her was a recurring role on Mad About You as the spacey waitress, Ursula Buffay, a character so specific and so funny that when Friends came calling, the creators found a clever way to fold her in as Phoebe's twin sister. She had to audition twice for the role, once because the director, James Burrows, was the same man who'd let her go from Frasier, and she was terrified he still didn't believe in her. He did. And the rest, as they say, is television history. But knowing where Lisa came from, the labs, the setbacks, the slow grind through every no Hollywood handed her, makes what she endured on that set even harder to stomach. This wasn't some starlet who got lucky. This was a woman who worked a decade to earn her seat at the table. And even then, the men in the back room couldn't treat her with basic respect. So what did the cast ultimately get out of the show? And did the success make the ugliness worth it? $1 million an episode. Whatever was happening in the writer's room, what happened outside of it is one of the most remarkable stories in the history of Hollywood contract negotiations. When Friends first premiered in 1994, all 6 cast members were paid $22,500 per episode. Equal, but modest. By season 2, the network started to play favorites. Jennifer Aniston and David Schwimmer, whose characters were the anchors of the central love story, were quietly offered raises above the rest of the cast. And here's where it gets good. Because instead of taking the money and running, Aniston and Schwimmer pushed back. They refused to accept pay that left their castmates behind. In season 3, both of them actually took pay cuts to help bring everyone in line with each other. The 6 stars decided from that point forward that they would negotiate as a single unit, all for one for all. It was an almost unheard-of strategy in television. Networks counted on divide and conquer. But the Friends cast wouldn't be divided. By season 7, as NBC's other shows failed to fill the gaps and the network grew increasingly desperate to keep Friends on the air, the collective leverage became undeniable. Salaries climbed to $750,000 per episode. Then, for seasons 9 and 10, the 6 cast members each earned $1 million per episode, making Jennifer Aniston, Courtney Cox, and Lisa Kudrow the 3 highest-paid television actresses in history at the time, according to the Guinness Book of World Records. And it hasn't stopped. In the same Times of London interview, where Kudrow dropped her bombshells about the writer's room, she was asked why she and her castmates still pull in $20 million per year in residuals more than 2 decades after the show's finale. Her answer? Characteristically brilliant. Because Phoebe Buffay was so great? She said it as a joke, but it's also just the truth. The show lives on streaming, on cable, on the laptops of teenagers who weren't alive when it aired. And every time someone hits play, the cast gets a check. That's not luck. That's leverage, loyalty, and Lisa Kudrow co-signing a biology degree she never fully used. But even all that money, all that success, all those residuals, none of it fully healed the wound that the show's most devastating real-life moment left behind. Matthew, grief, and why she finally watched it again. On October 28, 2023, Matthew Perry, Chandler Bing, the fastest wit on Friends, the man who built a career on deflecting pain with a punchline, died at his home in Los Angeles at the age of 54. The cause was acute effects of ketamine. He was found in his hot tub. For the Friends cast, it was shattering in a way that no amount of Emmy wins or million-dollar paychecks could cushion. "We are a family," they said in a joint statement. And they meant it. Kudrow has spoken about Perry's death with a tenderness that cuts right through the celebrity veneer. She'd always been clear that whatever happened off-set, whatever the writers said, whatever the pressures were, the cast itself was a different story entirely. They had each other. They showed up for each other. And she had said that Matthew Perry was a genius at work. She told E! Online that there was a genius at work, and that whatever any of them did in the future, they would never experience something like that again. After his death, Kudrow admitted that she began rewatching Friends, something she had famously avoided for years. Watching herself perform, she'd said, was too uncomfortable, too clinical, too much like watching someone else wear her face. But grief has a way of changing your relationship with the past. She told The Times that for the first time she truly appreciated just how great it was. And that, perhaps, is the key to understanding why Kudrow is speaking now. Not just about Perry, but about everything: the writer's room, the toxic behavior, the coping strategies she kept to herself for decades. Rewatching the show, grieving her friend, counting the years, she's reached a point in her life where the whole truth is more valuable than the comfortable version of it. She said it herself. She will never say anything bad about Friends. And she meant it. But saying what actually happened, that's not talking bad about a show, that's just being honest about the world that built it. What breaking silence actually costs? Let's zoom out for a second, because what Lisa Kudrow did with that Times of London interview is actually bigger than a celebrity spill. It's a data point in a much longer conversation about what it has cost women, specifically women in entertainment, to simply do their jobs. The Friends writers' room wasn't unique. It was a product of its era, the late 1990s, when "boys will be boys" was practically a legal defense, when women were expected to absorb casual humiliation as part of the price of admission. And for the most part, they did. They had to. The alternative was to be labeled difficult, oversensitive, a problem. And in Hollywood, that label follows you out the door. Amayani Lyle tried to push back, through the courts, and lost. The California Supreme Court decided that discussion of adult themes was just creative process. The message that's sent to every woman in the writer's room after that? Sit down, stay quiet, cash your check, and be grateful. What makes Kudrow's revelations so electric and so important is that she's not a disgruntled assistant or an anonymous whistleblower. She is one of the 6 faces that defined a decade of television. She earned the same $1 million an episode deal as her castmates. She has an Emmy on her shelf and $20 million a year rolling in from streaming. Nobody can dismiss her as bitter. Nobody can say she didn't make it. And she's saying it was still brutal. It was still wrong. And she dealt with it by pretending it didn't matter, which is exactly what every woman in that situation was trained to do. The writing staff of Friends has said nothing. NBC has said nothing. Warner Brothers has said nothing. And maybe their silence is the loudest statement of all. Because what do you say when one of the most beloved women in television history looks back at 3 decades of your silence and says, "I know what you did. I just decided not to care. And now I've decided you should know that I know." The truth about Friends was never really hidden. It was just waiting for someone with enough distance, enough security, and enough peace to finally say it out loud. Lisa Kudrow just did. And there you have it. The smiling face of Phoebe Buffay, and the real, complicated, unflinching woman behind her. Lisa Kudrow didn't blow up her legacy. She protected it by finally telling the truth about what it cost. If this video hits differently for you, smash that like button and subscribe, because our next video is going to crack open another behind-the-scenes story that is absolutely nothing like what you've been told. You do not want to miss it.